What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel. This is Leo's Nerd Talk, and today we're going to be talking about Salem's Lot. So let's get into that. Hi, my name is Leo. If I talk about anything movie, TV show, video game later, or just anything nerdy, you have come to the right place. And like I said, today we're talking about Salem's Lot. So without further ado, let's get into the review. And now I don't really have any prior knowledge to Salem's Lot. I've never seen the original film. I've never read the Stephen King book. So going into this movie, I was entering pretty fresh, not knowing really what to expect, what kind of vampire movie I was really walking into. And there's a lot to uncover here for sure. But before I give you my thoughts about Salem's Lot, let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section down below. Share your prior knowledge to this property. Have you guys ever read the book? Have you seen the previous movies? Definitely would love to hear all of your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. With that being said, starting off with the positives, and I just enjoy the overall starting point, the story that we're trying to tell here, the overall concept of this kind of writer that kind of feels like he's stuck and kind of going back to his hometown to get some inspiration for his new book. And while he gets there, things start to get a lot more sinister as this newly, vampire kind of moves into town, takes over this mansion up in the hill, and things start to get a little bit darker and eerier every day as things kind of just start to transcend into some more darkness and evil. And I'm just glad that we're getting into an era where we're starting to see a lot more resurgence of very good vampire movies. We have finally gotten out of that kind of Twilight era. We're starting to see some like more grittier, legit horror vampire movies. And this is still a fun movie to see, to be in that realm. I love my vampire movies. I love things like The Lost Boys, Fright Night, especially something like this year, Abigail. So seeing another iteration of, a previous property, of course, but still seeing some new vampire movies come out every once in a while is always going to be a positive in my book. And I also think we have a decent little cast here. I don't remember our main protagonist's name, but I just recognize him from Maverick, or Top Gun Maverick, as playing as Bob. That's the only place I've ever seen him before this. And then we have someone like the teacher, who I think is a very good character, who is someone that's actually very caring and charming, and someone that you actually care for. And pretty easily you invest yourself in this kind of character pretty much off the bat, because he does seem like someone that is genuinely there to help everyone else. And then you have like this young kid, Mark, who I think is just so resourceful, so fearless, and he shows you how you could still be a kid, but put yourself out there to take things into your own hand. And I really enjoyed his character. We'll get a little bit more into the rest of like the kid characters, but Mark as one of the main kid characters, I just really enjoyed his performance here. Nothing, to write home about, but it's something that you don't really feel like he's obnoxious, or that you feel like he's a nuisance or is getting in the way. If anything, he's helping move the plot forward and is actually able to stand on his own and being able to kind of feel like a grown-up, as a kid, feel like a grown-up amongst the rest of the grown-ups that are in our main cast here. So I do really enjoy Mark's kind of just his implementation into this group here going against these vampires. And speaking of the vampires, I do kind of like the look of them. They're a lot more simplistic, and until we get to Borlo, which is kind of like the head vampire, which we'll talk about him a little bit later. But overall, just the regular vampire stuff are a little bit more simplistic, but I like it. I like that they just have their regular pale skin. They have their fangs kind of popping out. They have these like really ominous red glowing eyes, and I like that. It doesn't need to be nothing too complicated. You don't need to make them look like bats or anything like that. Something very simple, but I still think is very effective, and it adds to that effectiveness with some of the creepy imagery that we get here. There's some really good shots in here, some really good creepy shots, some really good wide angle shots that look very beautiful to see on screen, even just something that want to watch it at home, because this was released on Max, not in theaters. But just the creepiness that he was able to kind of produce with these very simple designs of the vampires, especially when you get to like the kid vampires like Danny, who's like floating outside of Mark's room with the fog. You just see his glowing eyes and him telling him to open the window for him so he can get in. There are some very good creepy sequences like that. And even like when they get to the morgue and they're this mom turns into a vampire as well, I think that's also a very good sequence as well, that adds to the intensity, adds to the creepiness. So there is a lot of things here to kind of write home about when it comes to the effectiveness of the vampires. And I also really like this utilization of the shadows. It's very simple. As the sun is setting, you see these shadows starting to engulf the city or this little small town. But I also like that parallel. As you see the shadows engulf the town, you also see the town kind of dying slowly, where when you first get to here, this town, and you first see this population after the first kid goes missing, it's a bustling little town. There's a lot of people on the streets. There's a lot of people at the drive-in, and you see that transition from being a very bustling little small town that everybody knows each other to kind of being a completely dead town, a ghost town where there's no one on the streets. There's not even cars on the streets. So I think that is a fun little transition of seeing the town not only getting engulfed by the shadow, but also kind of just getting engulfed by this evil one, where the town itself feels like it's dying as you're watching the movie. So I do think that's a pretty unique visual as well. And I do think the last like 20 minutes of this movie was absolutely awesome. Just kind of this little drive-in area where they're having this kind of final battle with all the vampires. I thought that was really cool, a really fun moment. And it kind of reminds me of these other movies in the past. And I feel like this movie definitely is inspired by things like The Lost Boys or Fright Night. You can see some of that stuff kind of seeping through the visuals and kind of just these final battles and stuff like that. So I did really enjoy that final 20-30 minutes of this movie for sure. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into my cons. And unfortunately, I do have quite a bit to say here. Number one, this movie, again, does feel like it is just kind of repeating things from other movies, other vampire movies that are much better. Like I said, like The Lost Boys, like Fright Night. Like this definitely gives me a lot of Fright Night vibe, especially when they're trying to make this feel like more of a 70s style movie. And you have like the priest there, and you have like the older people that are trying to help them, and even like having the house look very similar to like the Fright Night house, and you have the familiar doing the vampire's deeds in the day and trying to protect them at night and things like that. So there's a lot of elements of this movie that just feel very similar of previous vampire movies that I think they did it better. And I touched briefly on it right now in that little speech, but they try to make this into like a 70s type of vibe, and I don't really get that. Besides them driving around like 70s style cars and living in an area that has a drive-in theater, this movie doesn't really feel like it takes place in the 70s. This feels very modern, even to the way the people talk, even the way the dialogue kind of gets presented. It feels very modern. It doesn't feel 70s, so I don't get that 70s vibe from it. So it doesn't even have that charm of the 70s horror movie, horror vampire film. So I think that's kind of unfortunate as well on just a storytelling front, and also just a visual front, that it doesn't give you that vibe. And kind of just speaking on dialogue, I feel like dialogue feels very weird and forced and choppy. There's a lot of line deliveries that just don't feel natural. Like one of the ones that kind of like really hit that point hard for me is when you have Danny's character who's in the hospital, and he is thirsty, but he's obviously wanting some blood. And the mom is like, "Oh, you're thirsty? Okay, water. Yeah, okay, don't worry, I'll be right back." And she runs out into the hallway. Nurse, my son is thirsty. And you're like, this is so off-putting. Like no one would react like that. So that's a big example, obviously, but there's a lot of moments and dialogue exchanges that just feel very unnecessary, feel very just over exaggerating, feels fake and forced. So there's a lot of the dialogue that just did not work for me at all, and it felt very cringy. And I talked a little bit about the visuals and the pros of how some of the shots look very, very good, very beautiful to look at. But overall, this movie definitely feels like a TV movie, a movie for streaming, just on a visual front. I don't really see a style to this director. It just feels very TV movie-ish, and I also kind of, the entire time in my mind I'm watching this movie, it made me feel like I was watching an episode of Stranger Things, or I was watching an episode of Goosebumps, or I was watching like if there was like an episode of It from 2017. Like it felt like all of that vibe, like especially on a visual front, it just felt very TV-ish. And if anything, it felt even cheaper than those things. You know, like I said, it felt very goosebumpy. You know, Goosebumps inherently from, you know, back in the early 2090s is not a highly production show. And that's kind of what this feels like a very low budget kind of student film type of movie where it just visually it looked very, very cheap. And one thing that I found that was kind of very disappointing was the ultimate reveal of Borlo, the main head vampire. I think when we kept him in the shadows, he looked very intimidating, but when we see him in full lighting, it just looks a little cheap, a little rubbery, a little fake, a little too maybe like CGI-ish in a way. Just the way his face looks a little too smooth, and you lose a little bit of that creepiness, that little kind of scary factor to his presence. So that was also unfortunate that our big main head vampire didn't even feel that threatening by the end of the movie. And I kind of touched on this in my prose a little bit too, but it did feel a little weird. I like the visual of seeing the city kind of go from being a bustling little town to kind of a ghost town. But I felt like that transition happened way too fast. I felt like it was from like one scene to the next scene. You'll see a bunch of people, and the next scene is just the town is dead. Like they ran out of the budget to get extra, so they had to write in that the town, you know, it's everyone's a vampire now. And I felt like the conclusion also of people realizing, oh, there's vampires in the town was really also just like a 1-2 punch. It went from one scene, you know, the priest trying to beg people, no, believe me, there are vampires in here, or the kids trying to tell the priests, for that matter, no, I'm serious, there's vampires in the town, you know, you have to believe me, to the next scene, like literally the next scene, the sheriff of the town is like, I'm out of here, you know, you can't tell me to stay here, there's vampires in the town. And I'm like, well, how did you know? You haven't even seen one yet. How did you come to this conclusion? So that was very also off-putting, and I felt like it was just really edited weird maybe, or the directing wasn't there, or they didn't have enough time, or whatever the case may be. It felt very, very rushed. And lastly, before I go on for too long, ultimately, I've never seen the other Salem lots. I never read the book. I don't know how good of an adaptation this movie really is, but it was boring. I was struggling to stay awake. I was struggling to stay engaged. If it wasn't for me wanting to do this review for you guys, I would have clicked off a long, long time ago. So it was ultimately not an enjoyable watch. I can maybe see myself watching this movie again, maybe, but I'm going to want to watch the original one, and I have very high expectations or very high hopes that that's going to be the one I would rather watch. But overall, let me know what you guys thought about Salem's Lot. I had a okay time with this. This wasn't anything special. I was hoping for it to be one of the better vampire movies of the last decade, but it really wasn't. But let me know what you guys thought about this movie in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear all of you guys' thoughts. And again, if you guys like time with a movie, TV show, or video game related, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you.